Hello, folks. Welcome to It's Devign Time. This was misprinted in the book. I think the people that typeset our book said this is not a real word. We will change it into a real word. But for us, this is a very real word, and we'll get into exactly what it means shortly. I am Aaron Forsyth, and this is the most played out picture of all time of me. But, you know, I'm embracing it at this point. I am the Senior Director of Magic R&D. And joining me on stage are four of my favorite humans in the whole wide world from our design and development teams. And we'll get to formal introductions of them very soon, as they're each going to talk us through a section of our card design process. I'm sure most of you heard the terms design and development that we use to make our card sets. And the simple version of how we do that is all of the designers start working and make a card set, and then all of the developers take it and make a bunch of changes to that set. And that's really, really oversimplified and not at all how the process really works. First of all, it's not a two-step process. It's a four-step process that takes a very, very long time, well over a year, closer to 2 years, once the actual card set comes together, and even longer than that for our large sets. And it's not just the designers working at the beginning and the developers working at the end. These teams that are working on each of these four steps of design are made up of people from all throughout R&D. There are developers working on the design part. There are creative people and art people working on all four steps of these. So it's a much more nuanced and well-developed process that we have to get cards together. And each one of these four pieces is what these gentlemen are going to be talking to you about now. So we're going to start with the first piece, which is called Exploratory Design, and this is Ethan Fleischer.
Hi, I'm Ethan Fleischer. I'm one of the designers for Magic R&D, and I'd like to talk about exploratory design. So exploratory design is the very first section from a game design standpoint that a Magic set or a Magic block goes through. So we meet for, these days, about 6 months. For a while we were meeting for 12 months before design proper begins, and we like to have a heavy rotation of team members. So we'll have some core designers like Sean or myself, some core developers like Ben and Sam here, and we'll usually have someone else from R&D, maybe the creative team, and then somebody from outside Magic R&D, but within Wizards. We like to get outside perspectives here, and those ones usually rotate through very quickly, but we want to get outside the box thinking, and so sometimes we can get a little bit inbred in our thinking in R&D, so it's good to get some outside perspectives. So there are sort of three big things that exploratory design needs to solve, and one of them is like, what is the absolute highest level vision on the set? What are the big themes? So we'll bring the story team in early on, like what's the genre of this story? What's the setting about? And then later on in the process, we'll loop in development as we get more into like what kind of mechanics would work here. So we identify a lot of questions that the design team is then going to have to answer. We try to answer a little bit of them, but in general, we realize that there's so much iteration and so many interconnected parts that you really need a full design team just crunching on it for a year to solve those problems. So for Zendikar, one of the questions we asked was, how do you depict a war between the Eldrazi and the Zendikari? What do the players expect in a return to the Zendikar plane, right? What are the good mechanics that really scream Zendikar, and what are the mechanics that were fine, that worked out in original Zendikar block, but nobody's going to miss them if we don't repeat them here? And then how do we deliver on new things in a familiar way? And then the other thing we do, the last thing we do, is design lots and lots of mechanics. We just spew out, we shotgun mechanics. We play with them maybe once, and we're like, maybe this could work, or no, this is awful, and then that's it. We just put them all in a box and give them to the design team. So here's an example of one. So here's Tiny Monster. This was a very small Eldrazi, and he can sacrifice himself to hedronize. So hedronizing was rolling an 8-sided die and consulting a chart to see what terrible thing this Eldrazi was going to do to your opponent. We played around with this quite a lot. We were trying to get the feeling that the Eldrazi were not fully under anyone's control. Nobody could really predict their motives or their actions. And so this was amusing, but ultimately the idea of like the winning move in the Pro Tour resting on this 8-sided die roll seemed not the most satisfying approach.
It was a fun game. It just wasn't Magic.
But we did end up making the actual 8-sided die at least, so that's really what I wanted.
That mechanic almost killed me. I was working with the pre-design team at that time, and I was just like, almost had an aneurysm like about twice a week.
That was pretty funny also.
That's kind of the exploratory design team's job, is to give someone an aneurysm.
Yes.
Well, here's some more realistic.
Oh yeah, here's some realistic cards. All right, so here we have Nattering Nabob over here. And you can see that we have, card name is colorless. This is the Ghostfire mechanic, or as we now know it, Devoid. So that was a thing that we decided on early on, a way to get colorless Eldrazi at all rarities to work in limited, so you would still have the diversity of decks that you want, while still having this weird feel to it. And then this one, Nattered, so that would let you look at some cards and get a colorless card. And yeah, it didn't too much card advantage. We don't like mechanics that have that much card advantage generally. But the Ghostfire mechanic made it all the way through. And then next to it we have Jumping Bear here. He has Color Frenzy. You can unlock colors by casting cards of that color, and they stay unlocked for the rest of the game. So we had all these colored beads. We're like, all right, here's the white bead, and here's the red bead, and these are here. Yeah, so it was a little crazy. And too many beads, but as you can see, that evolved into the Converge mechanic, which is a more reasonable version of, telling you to play with lots of colors, and provides a great contrast between the colorless Eldrazi and the multicolored allied team.
All right, so each one of these guys has a pie chart here at the end of their section, kind of just describing the hours spent when you're a member of this team, what you're doing with those hours.
Yeah, so we have a lot of meetings in exploratory design. We do a lot of talking, a lot of high-level discussion, a lot of talk about broad themes. We do a little bit of homework, which is usually people designing cards or coming up with ideas for specific mechanics. And then a little bit of play testing, check them out, see if they look plausible or implausible. Obviously, our judgment is not entirely accurate on that. And then we wrap it up in a bow, make a presentation to the rest of R&D, and hand it off to the design team.
And to talk about that, Sean Main.
Hi there. So we organized design into a couple really formal steps that have very fancy names. This is what it looks like on our books. This is a very integrated process, though, so we kind of just run through things. I think of these in much simpler terms. We're going to brainstorm, we're going to make cards, and we're just going to keep doing that and keep refining a set until it's ready to hand over to development. So brainstorming often looks like this. I apologize for the quality of these photos. They were for our purposes of documenting things. So the real question that design is trying to figure out, you're trying to create the vision for the set, because ultimately it's going to be development's job to execute on that vision. So you start with broad themes. In this case, this is from early Origins design. We were trying to figure out the overall themes. We knew it was about these Planeswalker origin stories. What kind of does that tell us that we can make a full set of cards about? We kind of early on honed in on this idea. It's leveling up, it's powering up, it's creatures getting more powerful. And so this is just us kind of, as Ethan said, shotgunning ideas for mechanics that are kind of in that space. You can see there's a lot of crazy ideas, and then there's one that stuck. This veteran mechanic, pretty much exactly as it was first written, with some templating and rules tweaks, kind of became renowned. This idea that the creature does something, it becomes more awesome, played right into the theme of the set. Here's the other half of the board. This is another one that was Spell Mastery. We took a lot of time really iterating on, trying it. It's such a simple mechanic in the end, but that kind of belies like all that work and all that exploration that went into it. Here's an early version, Green Spell Mastery. I think if you were to, which became the Spell Mastery mechanic, if you were to look up on the board, we had Creature Mastery and Kindles and things that were in a much crazier space.
And Jace's bachelor pad, it says right up there.
Yes, early on the set had a cycle of lands connected to the characters. Those did not stick. Here are some playtest cards from Conspiracy. So once you've got kind of the broad themes and the mechanics and things, you're slowly starting to get down to actually filling out a multiverse file, which is our internal database that holds sets. And this is what cards look like. They are beautiful art objects, as you can see, with often goofy playtest names. Over on the left, you can see an early Conspiracy, which had the very flavorful type of draft action. Clearly, there are other people who go into refining these objects. But all of these became cards in the final set. If you skip to the next slide, there's these all more or less, numbers changed and things, but some of the time cards do go through relatively unchanged through the process. And then you iterate. So we do lots and lots of playtests. Once you start having a file, we'll alternate kind of between drafts, we'll alternate between sealed, and then a little bit of constructed playtesting. It's a very limited kind of constructed that we'll do in design. And we have an internal wiki. Everyone who playtested will throw up all their notes. These are notes from somewhere early, one of our first sealed playtests for Origins. You can see the kind of stuff that I'm noting. Some of it's on cards changing numbers. Some of it is no one played blue, and spell mastery with 2 seemed okay. Let's keep trying that. So meetings in design are often sitting talking about these themes. Then you'll send people off. They'll do homework. They'll actually design cards. You'll come back. You'll talk about those cards. You'll go through lots and lots of designs. You'll whittle them down. And you'll get to the ones that you love. There's a little bit of play testing, but that's really to test out the designs, because your big goal in design is to refine the vision. That is until development gets involved.
And development first gets formally involved at a step we're calling Devign, and that's what Ben Hayes is going to tell us about.
Hi, I'm Ben Hayes. I'm on the development team also with Sam, but as Aaron mentioned, all the teams have members from all the different departments on them, and I'm also on a lot of design teams. So Devign is the period of time when both the design team for a set and the development team are meeting simultaneously. It's the overlap that where we're really looking to have a strong collaborative process. The development team is getting involved in the set, looking through the set, playing with it alongside the design team, figuring out sort of what's working, what they think is going to be fruitful space to move forward with, what they think is going to be challenging to use, what they might want to see other designs for, or different directions to go that might be better executable on. Importantly, during this part, the design team still owns the file. So they are still ultimately making the decisions about what state the file is going to be in when it's handed off at the end of this process. And the development team is involved in giving feedback, especially looking at areas of making sure that we're going to be able to end up with a final product that has deep and interesting limited gameplay, lots of constructed potential, the ability to make the cards in the set that people expect to be powerful, actually powerful, the ability to take the thematic mechanics in the set and work them into cards you want to pick in draft, cards you want to play in sealed, cards you want to put in your decks. So we're really taking a look at everything that's been done before this as a development team and saying, yes, this part we think we can take to the end, this part we're not so sure about, but the design team is still working and has that opportunity to adjust things based on the feedback. And as that wraps up, we get to the design handoff right before the development team starts.
Look at this, no homework, or almost no homework.
Very little homework. So both teams are meeting a lot and they're playing a lot. So play, meet, talk about stuff, exchange notes, talk with each other, play again, meet, play, meet. There's very little homework. There is some homework more for the design team if they have to make cards to fill holes for cards that are getting removed from the set because they're not working for one reason or another, but it's really heavily meeting and playtesting.
And Sean, Ben mentioned the design handoff document.
Yeah, so the final kind of deliverable that the design team has to the development team, we have a populated multiverse file. It'll look like a file. It'll have, 300 cards in it, however many that the set is going to have in the end. But they're kind of a first draft or a second draft of the actual set. Even more important is this handoff document, and you can see Aaron's M15 one up there. It's kind of expressing the vision for the set. It'll be a 10-page document. Maybe if you're Mark Gottlieb, it's more like 30 pages, and it's obsessively documenting everything you did. But its goal is to communicate everything you need to communicate, everything that's important to you for the development team to understand in crafting that final product.
And that leads us to the final step of the game design process, which is development. And this is Sam Stoddard.
Yep, you might recognize me from my weekly development column, where I am now, I believe, the third longest. I have, I just passed Randy Bueller, so I'm gunning for Tom, and then I've got a while before to Aaron, but assuming that I can keep doing it for a couple more years, I can get there.
So far, so good.
So far, so good. The trick with the latest developments is often you don't know when your last column is. Just happens one day. So, what does development do? There's a perception that development play tests, we fix numbers, we nerf things, and we just make siege rhinos, and that's all we do. And that's not actually true. It's much more than that. We do fix the numbers, but a big part of what development does is getting creative and design's vision to work. So a lot of what design is doing in their process is creating a biodome where a thing that they think would be fun would work. And so they're saying, well, in a set like Cons, it's like, okay, we want to play 3-color decks. We want these wedges to be a thing. And what they're really trying to do is find the design space where they think they can get that to be fun. And when it gets to development, we're going, okay, you guys want people to play 3-color decks, that's fine. But in design, they're usually like, they kind of approach from the angle of I put my 3-color deck together and it worked. And we get it, and we're just like, okay, we just played 2-color decks because that's way better. So now we got to figure out what to do to make it so that the correct thing to do is not just play 2-color decks. So we try to turn the great ideas that design comes up with and take that from being a fun biodome to being really a fun experience for everybody and working within the whole wider group of Magic. And we make some siege rhinos to help out. So development is, there's a little more homework than Devign, but there's not a ton of homework. The file is, for the most part, populated. Most of the card creation, a lot of it happens either by the lead on their own time or just in meetings when we're trying to mess with limited and we say, okay, well, what is white missing? And people say, well, I was having a hard time attacking. I need a creature that taps something, or I need a creature that gives all my other creatures +1/+1. And so we may go, okay, well, what do you want that to cost? 4 mana. Okay, we'll put a 4 mana creature in there that gives other guys +1/+1. Would that make your attack deck work? Yes. Okay, cool. There's a lot of that, and a lot of it's just meetings and going through and talking about the set for limited and saying, okay, what's the best color? What are the best commons? How can we kind of even it out so each color has about the same number of top commons, and they're in some order where it's not like, okay, if you look at the top 15 commons, it's like, okay, well, there's 4 red commons, 2 blue commons, 2 white commons, and there's like the last 5 are all green or something. The last 3 are all green. We try to even it out so that there's at least interesting decisions in most of your packs.
All right, so that's the 4 phases of how we make cards, and the next few minutes we're going to spend talking about making some of those cards. But I want to show a couple cards. Before I was the boss of all these guys, I actually came up through the design and development ranks myself, and I worked on making Magic cards pretty intensely for a few years, several years ago. So I'm going to show each of you guys, the developers and then the designers, some of my older work, and see what you think of it, how it holds up today.
Aaron has
for
not
Ben and
shown us
Sam-
this
yeah,
portion of the
don't
show.
they don't know what I'm going to show.
I am sure we are being trolled here.
I've been waiting for Skull Clan.
Ben and Sam, tell us about this one. What do you think of that one?
This is my favorite textless card of all time. The best part about cards with absolutely no text boxes is when there is not only multiple choices, but the order of the choices matter. It's great. Also, this is a fun textless card because if your opponent doesn't know what it is, they will never believe you, ever. What does that do? This time, it taps your board and I draw a card. I thought that bounced a permanent and countered it. It does that too.
What do you think, Ben?
It's pretty hard to follow up on. I mean, I had a lot of fun playing with this card when it was in Standard, but after coming to R&D, I definitely have a greater appreciation for the total amount of fun being had in a game. And looking back, I don't think my opponents were having very much fun.
All right.
Which, by the way, is okay if you are having so much fun. If you're having like 300% fun for both people, as long as they're not at negative 100%, that's fine. But
I mean, it wasn't that fun.
All right, for Ethan and Sean, how about this masterpiece?
Ethan?
So this is clearly an example of you trolling the Magic players at large. So this card is designed to be impossible to work, right? It is a
It's designed
line.
to be from the future.
It's
It is
from
designed
it's
to
from-
tantalize everyone
Right.
for many years.
So this card has taken on quite a life of its own. I'd say that it was a complete success on its intended mission, and that everyone wants to see more riggers and assemble contraptions. I mean, have their creatures assemble contraptions.
Right. The riggers have to do that.
The riggers have to do the work.
Okay. Now we'll talk about some more, normal, realistic Magic cards. So Sam, to tell us about one you guys are very familiar with in Magic Origins, which is the Planeswalker Gideon.
yeah, so very happy to see Kithian in the top 8 of the, or top 4 of the World Championship. That was great. This is how he actually started off. Gideon's a big, burly bodyguard, essentially, and so we're, when Sean had kind of made up the version, it was this, big 4/3. It's, invulnerable when attacking. We like the idea that when it attacked with other creatures, you could turn him into a planeswalker, and then he was this huge, 6/6, which is, but for 4 mana, it's just great. And it had this great ultimate that was totally fun and hopefully would make games end real quickly or never, one or the other. But it looked great. And the reason we came about this was we thought of this was kind of the concept art we had running around for Kithian of like him throwing Heliod's spear at I guess here was either at the Giant or Erebos, I'm not sure which, but he was a warrior and this like the strongest guy, like the Sun's champion of Theros, so we think that's like 4/3. That's great size for that. And then the concept art came in, or the sketch came in, and I saw this and I was like, that art is great. That is not a 4/3. So I went to creative and said, we can make this a 4/3, right? And they said, no. I'm like, okay, so he's 12. I guess he's not the 18-year-old. Okay, so he's 12. But it actually came into a great spot because then all of a sudden it's like, well, the other card was like functional but not great. And we never would have come to the idea of like, what if we put, we started off as Isamaru and then we backed off of it, but making like Savannah Lions as a planeswalker, and that's where we kind of came to the idea of going, okay, what if we make like a 1-mana planeswalker that is just a really powerful creature on its own right, and then turns into a powerful planeswalker on the reverse side.
All right, and Ben's going to tell us about a card we just saw for the first time yesterday, the new version of Ulamog.
So this is where Ulamog started. Not very recognizable if you saw the card yesterday. And I'm just going to go through a bunch of changes. The first one, that one. So we didn't just do this because we wanted to be mean or something, even though Sam is sometimes a little bit mean. We did this because Battle for Zendikar is releasing right after Dragons of Tarkir. And Dragons introduced these 6/7 mana incredibly powerful cards, and we knew right off the bat with Battle for Zendikar that one of the big challenges for the development team was going to be separating these Eldrazi from those dragons. And we felt like 8 was just not a significant difference. 8 wasn't going to let us really put words on this card that separate it from what you're getting for those dragons. So we bumped it up to 10 and then said, okay, starting at 10, let's figure out what we can put on this card. Then once it was 10, it's hitting all creatures. It was telling you to play colorless creatures with it, but we were just like, okay, we're charging you more mana. You can just hit your opponent's stuff. That's fine. Then we remembered that when we did the Titans the first time, they had cast triggers. So we added a cast trigger on, and then we changed the second ability so that it actually worked instead of not working. And then we ended up taking a bunch of noble steps in the right direction and ending up with a card that made no sense. A 10-drop that's good against opponents with counterspells and a lot of creatures with 3 or less toughness that are in play, even though you somehow got the 10 mana. And if you anyway, we just threw the whole card away. We knew the direction we wanted to go, but we had wandered around. So then we came to this card. We also wanted to make Ulamog feel like the biggest Eldrazi, like the head of the Eldrazi, and to do that, we tried putting this hunger mechanic on it, which was something that at this time we were trying on a lot of the smaller Eldrazi. Basically what it is a word that keys off the number of cards that your opponent has in exile. So you have those ingest cards that are building up your opponent's exile zone. These hunger cards got stronger and stronger as the game went on, and we decided, well, we can call back to Ulamog with the Annihilator attack trigger and have this hunger ability, and then we ended up with a card that was, one, very, very, very similar to the original Ulamog, probably too similar, and two, we got away from Annihilator for a reason, and we had taken the high-profile Awesome Eldrazi and gone straight back to Annihilator, which was what we wanted to separate from. So then we both killed the whole mechanic and then also took it off Ulamog. And we came up with this. As you hopefully have seen, there are processors in Battle for Zendikar which take your opponent's exiled cards, put them into their graveyard, and give you some beneficial effect. So we wanted to still have Ulamog have this terrifying attack trigger that kills you in a few attacks, even if you're blocking it. That callback to Annihilator, but not ripping apart their board in this kind of like depressing way. And we wanted to make Ulamog feel like it fit with the rest of the Eldrazi. If you get one attack off with Ulamog, it's going to be pretty hard for you to play enough processors that you can't do all of the processor things. Like if you run through 20 cards, something else is going on. And then the final change that we made is that one there, because as I mentioned earlier, we wanted to separate these from the dragons. Every step we went, we had to take these high-end Eldrazi that we were making and be realistic, compare them to the other options players were going to have in Standard, and looking at cards like Dragonlord Silumgar and Dragonlord Atarka, we felt like we needed to give Ulamog a little more for what you were paying, which is a lot.
And there he is. I think it's a he. Yeah. All right, we have several minutes left, so we're going to have people line up over by Dawn there at the microphone if they have questions about cards, how we make cards, why we make cards, why all the cards are so amazing. And after the panel, please follow us all on social media. We're all very active, not as active as Mark Rosewater, but, there's only room for one of that guy in the universe. All right, we got a decent line here, so.
Hi, I just started playing this game like 2 weeks ago, but I play other card games too.
Welcome. Glad to have you.
So I was wondering if you guys ever considered, I know there's the Planeswalkers that evolve in Origins, but have you considered doing any sort of like extra deck sort of thing? Like, I know you guys worked on Duel Masters that did that, yeah. And there's a lot of games. Card Fight just got an extra deck, then Yu-Gi-Oh's always had an extra deck. Has that ever been considered or almost done?
Yeah, I'll let someone remember this. Was anyone here working here on Avacyn Restored when the...
No, but
No
we
one- all right,
did
so-
something like that for Battle for Zendikar, actually.
Oh, did we?
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you the Avacyn Restored one real quick, which
All
was
right.
before Miracles existed. We were looking to try to come up with the what's in the Hell Vault magic, and there was a mechanic called Forbidden, which were cards you were not allowed to put in your deck. That's what the mechanic said. This card cannot be in your deck, and they were all like 3 mana 7/7 life linkers and things like that. And then there'd be other cards in your deck that would say shuffle a forbidden card into your deck. So then that way you would, now you have this. Now it's in your deck and you still don't have it yet. But then every draw step is a grand hope that this amazing card is going to come to you. It did not test well, both from how the games played out and from when we showed it to players and said, how does this sound? They're like, no, why would I want cards that can't go in my deck? And no numbers we put on them.
An awesome card that's
Right, it's
taunting
awesome.
me.
The most awesome card you've ever seen. The first thing on it is, this can't go in your deck. And then, so Ethan's got something we tried for BFZ.
Yeah, we an earlier version of Hedronized before we got to the 8-sided die was a separate deck that had weird Eldrazi symbols on it, and you would draw them at certain times, and then the card would tell you what happened when you drew the specific symbol. Ultimately, adding an extra deck means that for all time in formats where you have all sets that are legal, people are going to have to bring these things along. It's like one extra thing that people have to bring to tournaments for the rest of Magic's life, which we hope will be forever. And so we're very careful about adding things like that to the game.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yes, my question actually ties into that a little bit. When you're designing and developing cards, how much thought do you give to the older formats like Modern, especially Legacy and Vintage?
Sam?
There is quite a bit. We don't really play those formats very much, at least when we're working on cards. But we certainly have a lot of cards where we go, this card's really cool, or this mechanic's really cool, and it's like, well, that we have to ban 12 cards in Vintage if we do this. And it's like, okay, maybe it's probably not worth it. I mean, certainly when we are working on things, we are willing to take more risks with that format, those formats, than we are with Standard. And so if there's a card where we go, well, this might be too good in Legacy, but it's doing a lot of good stuff in Standard, we think it'll be good in Modern, we'll often take a shot with that. If it's something that's it's not really a Standard card and it makes Eternal formats bad forever, then we usually go, yeah, okay, we'll probably tweak it a bit so that it's not going to actually kill that format. We don't want to actively go through and be like, well, we printed a kind of a interesting little card that on as a side effect happens to kill Legacy and Vintage. It's like, well, probably not worth it. Let's, we can change that card. So we do think about it, but it's not we don't spend a ton of time trying to actually make a ton of cards for those formats.
Right. So a few examples. There's an elf deck that just popped up in Modern recently with the card Cloudstone Curio in it. And I remember when that card was in development, we recognized immediately that if it didn't say non-artifact, that the interaction with moxes and mana vaults and things like that from Vintage would just make infinite mana combos immediately. So we just wrote that, can't do that, no bouncing artifacts. So we think about if it's an easy fix that we can catch quickly, we will do it. But you saw we printed Treasure Cruise. Treasure Cruise is mediocre and limited. It's pretty cool in Standard and at the right power level in Standard. The Jeskai deck plays it, the Heroic deck plays a couple, but it's not everywhere, and not even every blue deck wants to play it. But it was just bananas in older formats. But we know we have that kind of safety valve of the banned and restricted list to fix that stuff. On the flip side, I think Sam did a good job with Origins, putting in Goblin Pile Driver and Harbinger of Tides were both very deliberate moves to try to get those creature deck, those tribal decks, a little more juice in Modern. And I've certainly seen the Merfolk show up, and hopefully the Goblin will soon as well. So we're thinking about it, but we need to test Standard and Limited so much to get them right because we're starting from nothing. There's no groundwork. Legacy already has an established metagame and lots of decks we will know, and Standard and Limited are always just that we know nothing every time we start, that we have to spend so much time on those. We just can't really put any internal resources to the older formats and just kind of hope we're getting it right and be willing to make some changes to the BNR list.
Thank you.
Hi, yeah, I really like the way that the sets have been coming along, starting with Origins, how a lot of the story is being told in the cards themselves. How has that new direction with design affected your jobs? Now is there a lot more pressure to make sure certain things happen on a card that might not necessarily make mechanic sense or whatever, but you have to tell an important story or something
Sean?
with that?
Yeah, From my perspective, it's really exciting to have that as a guiding factor. Because one of the things that you're looking for in design is kind of the direction that everything is pointing in. So you're looking for mechanics, you're looking for themes. Excuse me, I'm touching your water here. The things that are kind of going to be guiding you. And having creative directions is really powerful for kind of figuring out what your themes are going to be. And I don't know, I love, we got to do this a ton in Origins. You're going to see this a lot more going forward. This idea of like taking that story moment, working really hard with creative to try to figure out what it is. And some of the time it's really easy and exciting and it immediately clicks. Some of the time they're doing things that don't mesh with easy things to design and develop necessarily. And you know, I'm sure you've heard us use the adage, restriction breeds creativity. And there's a lot of that sometimes goes on with those cards. So I don't know. Those are some of my favorites.
And
always.
Ben, this doesn't end with just design.
Yeah, I mean, I would say similarly that the development team is excited when there are those specific restrictions and directions for the card. It can be challenging to want these specific cards to succeed, to be exciting to people, because we want the story to be right out there in front of people. So finding, you know, the exact mechanic or words that both are something you want to put in a deck and want to use and tell this story and fit, you know, at the right rarity in the right color for the right archetypes and limited and like it gets pretty complicated, but I definitely agree with Sean that it is not an annoying challenge, it's an exciting challenge because we're getting to do more with the cards than we were before.
Yeah, there were a lot of cool cards in Origins that came from the creative direction of Origins, more so than I think any set coming before it, really had a lot of story moments to show off. And because of Duels, we had a ton of art that was kind of commissioned earlier. And because we knew what the story was, so we had like, okay, here's all the things that are going to happen. And so it's like, oh, we need to make cards to make sure we're showing these off. Tragic Arrogance came out of, you know, that was really coming more from the creative side of like, well, we want to show this moment off. How can we find a card to make this moment work? And Nissa's Revelation was almost completely from creative. Like, we're not, you know, late in the set's development, it was like we have this piece of art that shows what happened when Nissa, her spark moment when she, like, you know, was searching the Akum Mountains and saw Emrakul and her brain exploded and she planeswalked. And so, you know, I was kind of at very late date was like, okay, how do we make this into a card? What is a green card that's like, and we, you know, came to an interesting spot eventually with the, you know, luckily we added scry as an evergreen mechanic, but like, oh, she scries because she's looking for something, and if she finds an Eldrazi, then draw a bunch of cards, get all
Her brain
life.
explodes.
Right. So, like, you know, giving that, it is really a great thing to come from, you know, from creative of saying, oh, here are these interesting moments we can show off, and it lets us make Magic cards that are things I think that we wouldn't just come up to with ourselves necessarily.
Yeah, I love Tragic Arrogance. That's just a fantastic card on all axes. All right, thank you. We're going to try to get through the next few of these pretty quickly.
Hi, you guys mentioned the new mechanic in Battle for Zendikar that uses your opponent's Exile Zone as a resource. I was kind of surprised to see it just because Mark Rosewater is such a big proponent of, you know, removed from the game means removed from the game. Did he kind of come around on the idea because of this particular mechanic, or did you guys just like tie him to a chair or something?
I had lots of discussions with Mark about this. It's true, he was like the, you know, stake in the ground. We shouldn't be doing this, et cetera, et cetera. The argument that I used to persuade him was that what we want to avoid is you using your own exiled cards as a second graveyard. So you having like things that, if I were to, you know, Swords to Plowshares your creature, you should not easily be able to get it back. And that's still true even with this mechanic. If I'm going to give you these cards back, I'm giving you your cards back into an active zone. That's my decision. If I don't want to give you back the thing that I Swords to Plowshares, I don't have to do that. So it's not making it easy for me to get my own things back, but it is just giving us a little bigger sandbox for cards. And, you know, the goal of the mechanic and the Eldrazi as a whole was to be bizarre. And so that meant we had to kind of bend some rules that we otherwise wouldn't want to do. But yeah, Mark was definitely, you know, nervous about it, but he came around.
In an early version, you were turning the face-up cards in Exile face down, so it was kind of like they went into Super Exile. But I
Which is
think
removed from the game for freaking forever.
Yeah.
Zone, I believe, is what it's called.
We've certainly made that joke quite a few times.
Yes.
We need Exile Prime or whatever.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi. How do you know when you're ready to move on to the, like you talked about the steps in the process, but how do you know when you're ready to move on to the next? Is there a formal review process? Is it you kind of vote on things and decide that way?
The schedule is done.
Or the schedule? Okay, that's
There's a date.
Hit the deadline. Always hit the deadline.
Right. We will tinker endlessly. Like nothing is ever perfect. There's so many moving pieces that if design lasted 5 years, you could spend 5 years making a card set. I mean, we've gotten to points very rarely where like I think we've done it. I think I've played it and everything was great. That's maybe once in a decade does that sentiment ever bubble up. But we got a lot of sets coming out. We have a relatively small team for the number of products that we are producing, and so everything's time boxed. We get to iterate a lot within our time box, but the curtain closes, and we got to be ready for that. And then we hand things off, and like clockwork. That those dates are exactly the things that are moving us from step to step.
Thank you.
How does one assemble a construct? The goblin card.
One
Tell
does,
us, Aaron.
One does not.
Thank you.
I'm sorry that you had to see that. Having only played for a couple of weeks. There's a long story. There was a set we made a long time ago called Future Sight, which was supposed to show off mechanics from the future of Magic. But that kind of, there's a logic problem to that because anything we showed you was now from the present. So my goal was to make a card that actually couldn't be from the present because it didn't work at all. It's a little bit of a Dadaist.
So it's from like 20 years from
thing.
now or something?
People tilt at this all the time, right? I hear it from people on forums or people email me, I've solved it. Here's how you assemble contraptions. This is how you're going to do it. It was never meant to be real.
I feel like there's an interrogation lamp on you right now when you're confessing to us.
In 2077, you'll be able to assemble contraptions.
I won't be alive to see that.
What's that?
I won't be alive to see that.
Well, we'll tell your kids about it.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Cards like Pile Driver are cool because, like, to a new player, it's like, oh my god, that's so cool, and to an old player, it's like, oh my god, they reprinted that. I'm just wondering, with high-profile cards that you decide to reprint, how do you decide if, like, especially because it's allowing you to put older cards into Modern now? How do you decide if Modern is ready for Counterspell? Wishful thinking.
I'll let them give the more formal answer, but there's always kind of the look towards older cards that you get to either cast in a new context with whatever the current environment is. And that's really exciting, to find something. I mean, Counterspell is a power level example that those guys can speak to. But like when you find the one card that you get to fit into Theros because it had the Greek mythology or Centaur Courser or whatever that is, those are the ones that like design gets really excited about and like draws circles around and is like, let's make sure these get through the set.
Yeah, I would say that usually when we're looking at reprints like that, we're looking at more stuff like Goblin Pile Driver than Counterspell, more synergy-based cards where we can do the thing Sean was saying where you remember it in this old context, playing a certain way with the cards around it because it had synergy with those cards. Now we can bring it back. It has synergy. It still has synergy with cards in the same environment, but they're different cards than they were the first time. They're really challenging cards to execute on, and it's really challenging to find the right ones because they were made for the time that they were made. So we'll try them out. We'll see how they work, but we don't want them to be super dominant because we don't want, our new standard format to be dominated by something that has already sort of had its time at the top And we also don't want them to be flops, because these are cards often that people remember very fondly, and we don't want to kind of tarnish people's memory of them. So it's a delicate process, but we try as hard as we can.
Cool. Thanks.
All right, any other questions?
I will also say Ethan has a goal of getting as many future sight cards into sets as.
Yeah, I always
I thought it was
check
Portal
future
3
sight.
Kingdoms cards.
Oh, well, those two. I look for Portal 3 Kingdoms cards, and yeah, every time we start a new block, I look through Future Sight and be like, are there any future shifted cards that would fit in here?
Is this the Spellweaver Volute?
Is this the Spellweaver Volute block?
I actually, I believe I remember Ethan once asking Creative if they have arrows in this world. Do they have, what was it, 100,000 arrows?
Right.
100,000 arrows. Are there enough arrows that we could borrow them?
All right. So the idea of creating a set or a game or something seems like such a daunting challenge. You guys have done it over and over again and successfully. What is some advice you would give to game developers who are looking to start something from scratch? What is those kind of key things that you've really locked onto as attributes to what has made Magic such a successful and dominant game?
Simplicity. This is a thing that took me a long time to really get to appreciate as much, and I think that when I play a lot of other games, there are a lot of things where I say, okay, this is something that is good. I like the gist of what's going on here, but if it was, you could take off 10% of what makes it good and make it 90% more simple, and all of a sudden it's just like, it's much easier to understand. It's certainly when you look at what we've done with Magic over the last 20 years, looking at like the pre-6th edition rules, the M10 changes, a lot of what we tried to do was simplify things, make things more understandable, more kind of that every time you played a game, like all the cards actually behaved in very similar ways. And a lot of that is, we lose certain things when we do that. When we took damage off the stack, we lost a lot of cool tricks. We lost some design space. But on the other hand, we gained some design space, being able to make stronger cards that had stronger sacrifice abilities. But we also just made it so that the game itself was simpler, and we are someone who comes into it, it's much easier for them to actually understand what's going on and much more accessible. And it's really hard to overstate just how much that first playthrough that somebody has, making sure that they basically understand what goes on, is really important to making sure that they want to have a second playthrough. And finding place for depth in places other than just complexity is really important.
I'll add, I think that's really good advice. I'll add two things. Figure out what your central theme is and stick to it really hard. Make sure everything is kind of descending outward from that theme. And also look to how other people have solved problems. When we're designing Magic sets, as you're filling out files, like you'll look at, let me go look at how M13's common black cards look. Oh, we're missing a Mind Rot here. Just simple things like that where you get to look at the work that others have done and how they've solved problems, especially when it's successful.
I think from a process standpoint, another key to Magic's success is iteration. Just play test and make changes. Play test and make changes. Do this over and over and over and over again, and your game will be a lot better for it.
There will be a point where there's something that you love that was the thing that solved a huge problem early on, and you're like, we're just gonna write that one in pen. We're going to tattoo it like that. Whatever else happens, this is the core functionality. And when you iterate, what you eventually find out is that, as everything else gets better, if that thing doesn't get better, like you have to end up cutting it, and it is one of the hardest things to do because you're like, oh, but it was such a beautiful solution to such a hard problem. But at some point, often you just find that you just have better solutions, and everything else is better, and that's the thing. If that's the thing holding you back, you need to cut that out or figure out a new way to do something and move on and just keep iterating through everything.
Thanks.
Yes, I was also wondering, with the change to the block structure and not having core sets to fall back on for certain staples, like you can't just throw, say I'll have Shock, Naturalize, Mind Rot in the core set to always fall back on. Does that change how you design the blocks at all?
Yeah, I think that you're going to see a larger proportion of those classic, very simple cards reprinted in our regular expansions now than you did previously, sort of to take in some of those things that were previously in the core set. So you'll see a little more of that in the expert level expansions we used to call them.
Right. The tricky thing is that if core sets had a complexity of 5 and non-core, the block sets had a complexity of 10, and the 4 sets added together therefore were 35, the risk now is that they're going to be, that total complexity is going to be 40 now that we don't have a core set. So we actually we're going to try to notch the other ones down to like a 9 and print a cancel or a shock or a mind rot here and there, as opposed to something with 25 more words on it just for difference's sake. Plus, we have these sample decks that are going to let us put cards, very simple cards, cancel or Runeclaw Bear or whatnot, into standard or into people's hands and let them be standard legal without having to necessarily print them every time a new block starts.
And we've always done some variations on that. I mean, cancel was in one of the Tarkir sets. Yes. Okay, there you go. And shock was in Onslaught. But like, often the simplest card is the one that's the correct one to do the job. So, you know, you don't need to keep looking. Fog exists or Giant Growth exists or whatever particular card is. Yeah.
Thank you. I have a follow-up
We got
question.
one more? Okay.
To the sample decks.
Yeah.
'Cause I do a lot of demos, and the sample deck meta is amazing. Like, it's a blast. I'm still like 0 for like 300. I'm pretty sure. But no, this is your demoing. Like, is that design different? And like, of course, it addresses the staples. Like, you know, you get your Runeclaw Bears and your intro stuff.
That is like a task that happens within development. Somebody ends up getting assigned to being, okay, you need to make the sample decks, and they spend a lot of time, you know, trying to figure out what is, you know, what each color does. There's usually a limit of 1 keyword for each sample deck, or, you know, sometimes like flying plus a keyword. And, you know, that, you know, we had the rares so that games actually end. There was a lot of feedback that the problem with the sample decks before was that there were no ways for the games to end because there aren't a ton of big evasion creatures. So 2 players that don't, like, you know, new players, they get into a board stall, and it's like, okay, who wants to attack? I have no idea the math. Do you? No. Okay.
And those decks had the stabs in them.
Oh,
so.
yeah, it was great. Games didn't end. Decking was a big deal. Natural decking. But yeah, we definitely spend a lot of time trying to make sure that we have a lot of good core gameplay based off of a lot of simple cards, which is it is a hard task, but something that we do take very seriously.
I'm very proud of them, though. I think as a game item that giving these away for free has been fantastic for us. Putting the rares in has been a big boon. People just immediately can fall in love with Shivan Dragon the way we all did back in the day, but I don't have to print it every year, and people get ticked off that there's a $1 rare in their booster or whatever. So it just accomplishes so many goals for us. And adding these cards in that aren't in standard and making them in standard here has just opened them up to be tuned exactly how they need to be. So thanks for noticing, and I'm glad you're having fun with them.
Thank you.
I'm back. I hear mill pretty much exclusively referred to as mill by you guys, by people who have never even played Magic, and I'm just wondering why it's never been keyworded, even if it's I never hear it referred to by anything else.
This does come up from time to time, and what it comes down to is I think no one's super happy with if you tell a lot of the action keywords we have, things like fight. If I told you my creatures fight your creature, we know what happens. Mill was the one that whenever we talk about maybe we should keyword mill at some point, it's like, well, what does mill mean if you don't know what it means? And like, it's not descriptive enough. I know
or even if you do know what it means, like the creative team spends a lot of effort making our game very, very flavorful, and saying mill 3 cards or something, and you're showing Jace, holding his temples, like, it implies that he's going to go down and make some bread. Is something very, very different.
Right. I think Gatecrash was the last set where we discussed, maybe it's time to keyword mill, and it just didn't happen. And I think that it might be one of those things where someday someone's just going to figure out the word, and they'll be like, aha, we found the word, and then we can do it. But I guess we're still looking, and who knows if we'll find it.
It is definitely a debate internally. It comes up cyclically that we need to find a word, because when we do the mechanic heavily in a set.
Cool.
All right. Well, thank you guys.
I think we have one last
One
last question.
Yes.
So I'm big on innovation here, and I know before Sean and Ethan joined, there was no exploratory design. It's just a new thing. Now there are just 2 steps before, and now you're showing us how there's these 4 steps. What do you think would be the next innovation to improve on the design development process? Now that you've got this whole system here, how do you break it and make it better?
Well, we've actually been having some meetings about this recently. That yes, it can be even better. Haven't solved that yet, but I mean, part of it is that, as I mentioned before, there's just a sheer number of products that we're making. Is that it's hard for there to be ownership of a person for any given project, because everyone's working on 4 projects and there's 25 projects going on. You know, we're looking more at a traditional game design studio model of maybe there should be like an executive producer or someone who's a vision holder that's just assigned to that one thing for its entire lifespan. 'Cause that's not happening now. Like we're all handing stuff off to each other. We all kind of generally know what's going on and all know the 50 things that are going on and which cards are in which set. But you know, stuff falls through the cracks, and you know, so we're actually kind of, instead of blazing a trail, maybe looking elsewhere for inspiration as to how to better corral all the stuff that we're doing.
I think the challenge that we run into sometimes as we've grown is sharing information just with ourselves, and that probably innovation is going to come from how we talk to ourselves, like Aaron is saying.
I suspect the next big innovation will be a tighter creative design development whole integration. We've kind of seen it move more towards that, but there's not a huge formalized process now. And my guess would be that, you know, there's a lot more like kind of creative design overlap, and development and creative doesn't quite communicate as well, and some of that is just a timing issue and when they're doing their major work for world building and when development gets set. But I think that if there's an area where we can improve the most, that's probably it.
Yeah, I agree with Sam. Like, that has been a consistent trend, that for a while it was just the design and development teams would throw the set over the wall and the creative team would just skin it. And we've seen the creative team's involvement creeping farther and farther into the beginning of the process, and now actually the creative team starts working on the setting before exploratory design begins. So the integration there is continuous.
Yeah, that's a really good answer. I like the whole adding the creative team and possibly, you know, getting in more people who could work on that creative team from somewhere, you know, to help you guys innovate with the process that you might improve there. Yeah.
All right. And that's it, folks. Give these guys a round of applause. And I hope you'll enjoy Battle for Zendikar. Thanks for coming. Oh, it's Matt Place. What's up, man? What were we going to ask you? You disappeared.
Well, we can talk outside. Because I think that
I said 2077.
Oh, well, too late now.
Be happy to. I love the art on this thing. It's so gorgeous.